We can do it. Okay, hang on a second. My computer forgot how to paste things. So now, if anyone's watching, which no one is, they've just been staring at us for a few minutes.
But when you do go back and watch this afterwards, just know that you get to see a little bit on the inside of what goes into this podcast. A little cutting and pasting.
Cutting, pasting, Dan and I staring at each other.
Yeah, it's a good time all around. And for anyone who sees that Penn State logo back there, that's my roommate's. I don't endorse that at all. He put up the flag. I still owe Wisconsin one in our living room, so I'll get going on that because I can't really have this Penn State logo just showing up in every hangout from this point on. I'm actually going to turn my computer so nobody sees it.
No, yeah, I don't think you want anyone to see it.
Nah, I mean, not as a Wisconsin fan. All right, let me know when you're ready to go, Matt.
All right, I tweeted the link out. So let's go ahead and officially start. So welcome to Week 4, Hot Takes and Hot Cakes. It's presented by Sportable, and I am Matt Harmon, and I write for Football Guys and Sportable and various other places, and I'm joined by my good friend here, Dan. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, guys, so my name's Dan Schneier. I also write for Sportable, and then also for Pro Football Focus Fantasy. Fox Sports, I write about the NFL only, no fantasy, but check that out. And then I also write a little bit for RotoViz, a more statistical fantasy football website. But yeah, we're doing this one for Sportable, so if you haven't checked out Sportable and you just stumbled upon this at Google Hangout, check it out. If you like what we're talking about here, and we're going to go deep into some matchups, look at some stats, look at some numbers that you might not see otherwise. But if you like it, then take a look at Sportable, because what Sportable does is it attempts to cut out the clutter with fantasy. So you're going to get on there, and you're going to see cards dedicated to players, to individual different things with regards to fantasy football. And it's just the facts right there, and cuts through any of the crap that you won't want to read at somewhere else with a lot of fluff, and there is no fluff. It's fantasy football without the clutter coming at you live. So check out Sportable. It's run by a great guy, Sal Stefanale. You probably know him from Twitter. He's the 2QB guy. He's kind of a big part of the whole 2QB league movement, and he's got some great strategy and advice for tackling 2QBs leagues as well. So without any further ado, let's get started on this podcast. Before we get into it, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of how we usually run this. I'll be running this today. Me and Matt will take a look at all the questions we've gotten so far through Twitter. Remember, if you're watching this now and you want to start getting your questions answered, we'd love to answer your questions. So just tweet at us right now, either Matt Harmon _BYB or at Dan Schneier NFL. Tweet at us your questions. You can see that at the bottom screen with our logo. Yep, Matt's pointing. He's doing a better job with his hands than I am. So yeah, tweet at us any fantasy football questions with the hashtag hot takes and hot cakes, and we'll answer them. That's our goal here, to answer questions. So first we're going to run through the questions, then we're going to get into the matchups. Me and Matt pinpoint 5 matchups that we feel the strongest about just through our research of the week, and then we're going to bring on TJ for a little daily fantasy advice, and then lastly we're going to end this bad boy with more questions that we get. So let's get started, Matt. What's our first question today?
Sure, and our first question comes from @tfrowning86. And he asks us, currently have Brandon Marshall at wide receiver and Jeremy Maclin in the flex. Would you sit Marshall and put Sproles at the flex? And this question comes on the hilt of many, health problems, questions about whether Brandon Marshall is going to start. And it does look like he is going to play today. So with that in mind, Dan, what do you do here?
Yeah, so if we look at the history of Brandon Marshall, you're going to see that he's the type of guy who's played through a lot of injuries. He's pretty much a warrior out on the field. I don't generally love playing injured players. There's such a high risk for re-aggravation and really low floors through that. But at the same time, if you look at the other thing, you're opting to play either Macklin and then Sproles in the flex. You're really limiting your ceiling there. So maybe if the case is you think you have a very even lock matchup and you're going to need every point you can get, I can somewhat see playing Sproles over Marshall in the hope that maybe he churns out a few more points here or there, but it's just too big of a risk to me, so I'm not going to advise it because you're really just minimizing the touchdown potential. When you have both Macklin and Sproles going, they're taking away touchdowns from each other. So I would stick with Marshall, and I hate to do it because I don't love advising playing injured players. Matt, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, it's a really tough one for me too because if you just look at the past few weeks, when everybody thought Marshall was going to sit and everybody said, "Oh, bench Marshall," on that Sunday night he caught 3 touchdowns. And then last week when it was, "Oh, he's a go, make sure you're playing Marshall," he gets 1 catch for 6 yards. So it's been kind of a headache so far what to do with Brandon Marshall, and it looks like most people have been on the wrong decision so far. However, I'm going to say you play him this week over your options, Tim, and that's because he's a great player, and anytime he's on the field, he has that potential to catch 3 touchdowns. Sure, he is banged up. He does look a little gimpy. I think you view him as kind of a wide receiver too. And if you had a better option than Sproles on your flex, not that Sproles isn't a great option, but I think Dan made a great point that that Eagles offense is so. They just spread it out to so many different targets. You can never really guess who's going to have the big week. Last week it was Jordan Matthews, and his price on Daily Fantasy really indicates how much people view it, what people view him as now. But he could conceivably have 1 catch this week. So who knows? It's tough to guess with Chip Kelly's passing offense, and for that reason I'm going to stick with Macklin, who's been the one kind of consistent guy so far. And for Sproles, I'm just gonna I would keep Marshall there and have Macklin in the flex like you have it. So I think we're both in agreement there that you stick with Marshall for now. It could burn you, but hey, that's how these things go. Okay, so next question we have 2 questions from @HWilder15, and she said Larry Donnell did well Thursday. Would it be a good idea to keep him or let him go? I'm afraid they won't continue to use him while on a hot streak. Dan, you're kind of a Giants fanboy, so why don't you take this question? And
I don't think I like that terminology there, Matt. Giants fanboy. I'm not sure I'm on board with that. And now you're pushing the edge here. You may make me go into your Eli Manning call from 2 weeks about how he was done, but we won't get into that now. I've said enough. I've said my piece on that. Anyway, back to the question. So, yeah, I got to be honest with you. I don't think this Larry Donnell thing is a fluke. So he starts off as an undrafted free agent 2 years ago from Grambling, a school that doesn't really get too many looks from the pro level. I mean, if you're an outstanding talent, you'll stand out. But he didn't really jump out at his pro day with any crazy measurables or anything. So he's just a former quarterback who the Giants said, okay, we'll take a look at him and we'll make him a project. Since then, he's really upped his game. He's focused on the actual position of tight end. He's learned the position of tight end. And at this point, I don't think it's a fluke for one major reason, because he is their major red zone threat. So if you look at that team, you have a guy like Victor Cruz, you have a guy like, unfortunately, Preston Parker, which will eventually hopefully be Odell Beckham on the outside, then you have Ruben Randle. And aside from Donnell, Ruben Randle may be their biggest receiver. He's probably a couple inches shorter than Randle and way less physical at the point of attack. So if you look at those 3 touchdowns this week from Donnell, he high-pointed 2 of them. He made a great adjustment on the 3rd to catch a touchdown, and he really just looked like a red zone threat down there. He wasn't just a guy getting the ball in perfect spots. So I think he's going to continue to be the number 1 or number 2 at worst target in the red zone for the Giants. And the way this offense works, it's designed to get the ball out quick from Eli Manning's hands. So what that means is he's going to have a lot of check downs in a sense, and that doesn't necessarily mean running backs in this offense. It just means easy outlets when he looks for a progression or 2, doesn't see what he likes, and has to get rid of the ball quick, because the offense really, the goal is to get rid of the ball in 2 maybe 3 seconds at most. So those outlets a lot of the time are Larry Donnell. So you'll see a lot of games where he has 5 or 6 catches with 60 yards, and it's going to come down to him getting those touchdowns in the red zone. And considering the fact that I really am going to go out on a limb and say he's their #1 target going forward, and at worst #2 in the red zone, I think he's going to be consistent tight end 1 for you for the rest of the year. Matt?
I agree. I agree pretty much with everything Dan just said. Donnell, he's not a fluke. I mean, if you look at the first two weeks, he was relevant pretty much. He was fantasy relevant the first 2 weeks as well. Week 1 he caught 5 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, 7 catches for 81 yards and no touchdowns. But then his worst week was 6 catches for 55 yards against Houston in Week 3, and that's mostly because the running game was taking over. I mean, those are tight end 1 numbers. I mean, they're not Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski numbers, but those are big time numbers for a tight end, low tight end 1 numbers in this day and age, where tight end is so volatile and there's so much after those big, the big 3 or big 4 if you want to put Jordan Cameron in there. It hasn't happened this season, but after those guys, it's a streaky business. But Donnell has been consistent, and he ran a 4.9 at his pro day, which is not impressive at all. But he's a big guy, man, and he does have good ball skills. And if we've seen one thing out of Eli Manning, even when he has a down year, he always looks to feed tight ends. I mean, he made Martellus Bennett relevant when it didn't happen at all for him in Dallas. He's a guy that he likes to look for that outlet receiver, the tight end, and a guy with big ball skills like Donnell, that's a guy he's going to look for in the red zone. I agree. I think he's their #1 target in the red zone. I think you stick with Donnell for sure. No reason to throw him back or think he's Luke at this point. So, yes. Moving on to our next question, and this is from the same user, and she asks us, Forsett or Taliaferro? I love my Ravens, but they switch up on me. And will Jacoby Jones contribute more going forward? Okay, and I will take this question to start with. And so Forsett and Taliaferro, I think, it's one thing you can't discount about this question is you can't discount that the Ravens have seemed, pretty loyal to Bernard Pierce. Even after, I know they benched him in Week 1 for his fumble, but then, they came back and gave him a ton of carries. Him week, but he's probably going to play this week. So it's a mess right now in the Ravens' backfield, honestly. But if you're picking between these two, if it's a PPR league, I think you're fine playing Forsett. I think he can get it. He's relevant enough in the passing game. He's really the only guy back there right now who can catch passes. He'll at least give you a pretty safe floor. We won't fall off a cliff in a PPR league. As for Taliaferro, if it's a standard league, I don't mind rolling him out there because he did have a really nice performance and looked like a good system fit for Gary Kubiak last week against the Browns. So if you're in a pinch in a standard league, or if you're a 0 running back drafter like I was, you can feel all right putting Taliaferro out there if it's a standard league. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, so just looking at this from a perspective where I have a little bit of a head start on, and that's the fact the actual snaps that these two are getting. I read a weekly piece on timeshares around the NFL where I take a look at different snaps and different situations where players play. And Forsett is a guy I trust more right now, and I'm going to say why I trust Taliaferro in a second for the future a little bit more. So Forsett is still going to play when this team falls behind. So in the games where the Ravens do not have the game flow on their side and they are playing from behind by 10, 14 points, Forsett is the pass down back. Even last week, he ended up playing 38 snaps. Taliaferro played 31. This was without Pierce, as Matt mentioned, who the Ravens still like going forward, I believe. I would agree 100% with what he says there. So Forsett, though, is going to be the one who has the role in these type of games where they need a pass down back. Going forward, the reason why I trust Taliaferro more is just a simple fantasy term. I don't even know what to call this that I just try to follow throughout. That talent generally always wins out. From what I've seen on the field so far this year, Taliaferro is the most talented of the 3 backs. His yards per carry doesn't lie. His yards after contact doesn't lie, and they both tell the same story. And I just think he's best suited to run this system with the way he runs. Yes, Pierce is a decent one-cut zone scheme blocking running back, but he runs a little upright for me. It's just not my cup of tea as far as running backs go. So I'm going to say long term, I like Taliaferro more just because I think talent will win out there. But for the short term, and that could be a longer short term, as in 4 to 5 weeks, it just really depends on Pierce's situation and how well he comes back from injury, and if he can sustain health. But for the short term, I do like Forsett because he has a real role in that offense as the passing down back.
Yeah, sounds like we're in agreement there. And if you notice, we have a little third guest on the show right now. I had to bring little Charlie up, my little puppy, on my lap because he's disrupting the old dog. So just trying to keep him in line. So if you notice a little face popping up on my screen, that's my boy Charlie here. But anyways, so getting back to the questions, we have one that came in from @UK11Brad. I need one for a non-PPR. Shorts, Tate, or Sammy Watkins, and that's Cecil Shorts, I guess, Golden Tate, not Ben Tate, or Sammy Watkins. So, Dan, out of the three for non-PPR league, who do you like best?
Yeah, man, I'm sticking with Golden Tate in this one. I've been a big Tate believer. I've been on his bandwagon since the preseason. He hasn't necessarily stolen the show yet, per se, but he's been a really good receiver. He hasn't dipped lower than 50 yards, even in the games where the Lions haven't really passed the ball that well. And this matchup I just really like for him. You're going to hear me, unfortunately for Packers fans, you're going to hear me trash Dom Capers every time I talk about the Packers defense on this show, but he really just doesn't get it. He hasn't changed much with his defensive schemes. It's pretty much the same things that used to work, I guess, for him at some point in his life. I'm not really sure when, but this Packers defense hasn't really performed well since the season where they were 15-1 and lost to the Giants at home in the divisional round by 14 plus points. I know you like how I fit that in there, Matt. But
fanboy.
Yeah, I'll try to tone it down here, but I mean, really, it's not really necessarily an individual thing with this defense with their cornerbacks, but it's an overall pass defense thing where they're not really that good. They give up a lot of yards. They give up big plays. Even Geno Smith torched them a few weeks ago for 300-plus yards, I believe it was. So really, this is just a defense that gives up yardage, and I think that I'm sorry. Hold on here. A little bit of a mistake here on my end. Matt, do you want to take this? I was looking at the wrong matchup here.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I can get right back into it, so sorry about that. Tate's actually facing the Jets this week. I was looking at the wrong thing there. Went a little bit into the Packers defense and a diatribe about how much I hate Dom Capers. Let's go back to the Jets. So
I had no wherewithal to correct you, so I was too busy over here in my own world.
Just a little mistake on our part. Hopefully that won't pop up again on the show.
Right, that's okay. And I was ready to make some good points off your fake matchup there too. But anyways, so now that Dan and I have completely taken ourselves off the rails,
I can get back into this though. Why I like this matchup because it was one I circled on here, so it's not completely talking out of my ass. I like it because
makes sense.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, it still makes sense as a call that, it's against a poor secondary of the Jets. So go ahead, continue. Let's get back.
So let's get back into this with the real matchup. And no more Dom Capers hate, at least for now. So, yeah, he gets to face a Jets defense that's playing an interesting style of ball right now. Because of the deficiencies in the secondary, Rex Ryan has kind of gone with an all-out, all-or-nothing defensive scheme. This was highlighted by John Gruden, on Monday Night Football, and then you really can tell it just from looking back at the game rewind of any of their past two games, dating back to the Packers game. So what they're going with is a lot of jailbreak, a lot of house blitzing by him. So Rex Ryan in this defense. So really what you're seeing is the corners out on an island where if they don't make a tackle, there's going to be some plays that are just going for tons of yardage. And last game, I think it was Antonio Allen who made a couple incredible saving tackles that would have turned into huge gains had he not made it. But this week, you're going to see Golden Tate get a lot of coverage, not with Antonio Allen. Now that Calvin Johnson is playing, you're going to see Tate matched up with Darren Walls on the other side. And Walls has really been really disappointing in coverage so far this season. So I really think it's a great matchup for Tate against Darren Walls with in basically one-on-one coverage where if he makes one guy miss, he's going to the house. And an interesting stat about Golden Tate was that last season he forced the third most missed tackles in the NFL, and that was with the Seahawks on very limited amount of targets. So you're looking at a guy who can force missed tackles, and this is a whole situation where if he forces a missed tackle in the open field, he can take it to the house. So you're going to have a lot of opportunities against Darren Walls to do this. And while I may have not started this question off in the greatest fashion, probably the worst I've ever done on here, I think I ended it well because really you're looking at a situation where he's facing a poor corner, he can make guys miss in the open field, and there won't be safeties over the top to help him. Matt, would you like to tackle the actual question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good call by you to go with Tate. You know, he's not his team's top target, but it's a high-volume passing game against a bad secondary, and I think he's a good matchup, as you mentioned, a guy that can break tackles. I think you highlighted that really well. Watkins, he'll have his weeks like he did in Week 2, where he puts up a great stat line because he's the team's top target, you know, and all that type of stuff. When the passing game is good, he'll be good. But it's tough to predict, and I'm not really in the business of whether that's going to be this week or not. So I like to go with Tate. You know, a big-time passing game against a bad secondary. It makes a lot of sense. So moving on to the next question here, we have from @SoftballJesus, that's an interesting handle. He needs 2 from a half-point PPR. Reggie Wayne, T.Y. Hilton, Mike Evans, Jeremy Curley, or Justin Forsett. It's a lot of options. So we have Reggie Wayne, T.Y. Hilton, Mike Evans, Jeremy Curley, or Justin Forsett, and we need to pick 2. It's a tough call. It's a tough call for me. I think I would go with Reggie Wayne. Oh, man. It's tough. It's a struggle with the second one. I'm going to go with Reggie Wayne. I'd probably play both of the Colts this week, not going against a good defense, and they're the best players out of the bunch. You know, Hilton has been quiet so far, which I kind of expected to happen, but I think this might be the week he goes off. And Reggie Wayne's always a pretty safe option. I think it's tough. I don't really like starting 2 players on the same team, but this could, you know, this is a team that has passed the ball well, especially against Jacksonville. I expect that to continue this week. So, what about you, Dan? Do you go anywhere different with that?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier I don't really love the game flow for Justin Forsett in this one. I think that they're going to kind of be in a back-and-forth game with the Panthers all day, and I don't think it's going to be featuring him too much because they're just not going to need him as much in a comeback pass down type role. So I'm not going to opt to play Forsett. I can't opt to play Curley against the Lions defense, even if Decker is going to be a situational player today, which it looks like he will be, just because I don't see the Jets moving the ball that well against the Lions as an overall thing. So really, I think the way you want to look at this is if you want the safest option, if you want the highest floor, I would go with your 2 Colts. They're facing a poor defense, and the Titans' offense is going to be giving the ball back to the Colts all day because, let's be quite honest, Charlie Whitehurst is not an NFL quarterback. I wish they had made the move to Zach Mettenberger, but they're apparently not ready for that yet. They're deferring to the veteran. It's a very Ken Wisenhunt type thing to do, in my opinion, and that's fine. So I think they'll be giving the ball back to the Colts a lot. It's in the Dome where Hilton has seen some of his best games, so I like that. But if you want to go with the highest ceiling, if you're in a league where you think, okay, I'm not going to be in a game that's going to finish under 10 points, I need to really hit on my second call, then I would roll with Wayne for the safer PPR option and Mike Evans. Evans showed a decent rapport with Glennon last week, and he really takes on a Steelers secondary that hasn't looked good at all except for last week against the Panthers in a game that I just couldn't call at all, and I'm still a little surprised about. And they really saw more injuries this week to their secondary with Ike Taylor going out. So you're just looking at a secondary that will crack. Also, I'm sorry, Ryan Shazier is out, so they're picking up guys like James Harrison off the scrap heap to play linebacker for them. So, listen, the upside there is to play Evans. I don't know if you're looking for upside or the safe play, because if you're looking for the safe play, I'm going to opt for Hilton and Wayne.
Yeah, I think that's the safe move, and just of the options, that's the way I'd go too. Okay, so this question comes in from @Spider2yBanana, and this is one of our RotoViz friends. He asks us, Corey Fuller, Jarvis Landry, or Kenbrell Tompkins? Yes, it's a ridiculously deep league. and those are some pretty despicable options, I have to say. So there's no real right answer, I think, here, but out of all of them, I'm going to go with Jarvis Landry, just because he's playing the Raiders. I don't know. I mean, it's tough to tell. Maybe you have some deeper insight on this, but as far as Kenbrell Tompkins goes, you know, the Patriots are so weird with how they are operating with Aaron Dobson and Kenbrell Tompkins. It's like they're almost like they're playing games with the two of them, which is a very Patriots thing to do. But so I'm going to go with Jarvis Landry. It surely might not work out at all. But hey, he's playing the Raiders. He's shown a little bit so far. He's shown some of that toughness, some of the ball skills that he showed in college. So perhaps this is a week where he posts a decent stat line. So that's the way I'm going.
Yeah, I'm really happy to get this question from Spider Y Banana, the Intersect. He's the man on Twitter. If you know us, you probably know him. He's a great guy. He does most of the work over at RotoViz. He's a huge part of what has made them such a big player in this industry, and I give the man credit for everything he's done. So I love the question. It's a really deep one, and in these questions, I like to usually go with the guy with the most talent in the easiest matchup, and in this situation, it is Jarvis Landry. Against the Raiders secondary, he'll likely see a lot of Carlos Rogers in the slot. Rogers is not the same slot cornerback he was when he was with the 49ers, shutting down people back in 2010 and a little bit of 2011 where he started to tail off. He's an older player, and he's not as quick anymore. So I think that if Landry can get enough snaps in the slot, and if it's not all Gibson or not majority Gibson, he'll be a really solid play here. He's the type of guy who has the most talent of the bunch, and he's in the easiest matchup, so I'm going to go with him. It's a deep question. It's tough to get these right because it's kind of like one play can change everything, but I think you got to go with talent and matchup in this one.
Yeah, I agree with there. It's definitely, hey, who knows? We'll see what happens with that question. But anyway, so we got another one, and this comes from @BustinDrown. And he looks like he's inversed his name from Dustin Brown, so that's clever. I like to analyze Twitter handles, but anyways, back on track here.
We need more of that, more analyzing Twitter handles, less analyzing teams.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that really
yeah. No more talking about
really is what people are tuning in. Yeah, right. Anyway, so Ahmad Bradshaw, Shane Vereen, Jamal Charles, Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas at running back, Brandon Marshall, DeAndre Hopkins, Steve Smith at wide receiver. Who do I start? It's tough. We don't really know the lineups exactly, the exact settings of the league, but let's just go ahead and assume it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex here for Mr. Brown. So we have Jamal Charles, Shane Vereen, Ahmad Bradshaw, Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas at running back, which is a very deep stable. So let's just tackle that part of the question first. So what 2 running backs out of there are you going to put in the running back spots?
Yeah, so you're going to hate me if I don't say Charles, and he does great today, but I don't think I'm going to opt with Charles here against that New England run defense, and just with his situation still a little murky. I'm not really sure how healthy he is. So I'm not going to say Charles, assuming we're going 2 running backs, right, Matt?
Yeah, 2 running backs.
All right, I'm going to go with Bradshaw, even though this is not a game where the Colts are going to be in comeback mode. This is not a game where they're going to be playing as many passing downs, which is usually what Bradshaw comes in for. But last week he played a lot of early down. He had a lot of early down work, and this is against a really weak Titans run defense that had one good game to start the season. So I was like, okay, maybe they can stop the run. But then you look at it, and they've been gashed in the run the past 2 weeks, and this is Ray Horton's 3-4 defense coming over, and doesn't have the personnel really to match the defense. And I thought this would happen eventually. He's a good coordinator when he can get the right pieces to work, but he's a very aggressive coordinator, and that can lead to some open, gaping holes in the run defense. And I think Shaw will have a lot of easy work there, so I'm going to opt with Shaw there. Game flow-wise, I don't love Vereen in this one because I think that the Patriots will have a solid lead even in Kansas City, and in these type of games, they usually like to lean on Ridley. So I'm actually going to go with Pierre Thomas as your second running back. Again, this may also be a situation where the Saints get off to a big lead, but Pierre Thomas gets his work regardless because there's just game situations where Sean Payton wants to pass the ball and wants Pierre on the field. I think he'll rack up receptions and maybe get a short touchdown as well. So I'm going to go with those 2 at running back. As at receiver, I don't like benching Hopkins at this point. He's been extremely consistent from a fantasy football standpoint. He's turning into the #1 target there, I think, over Andre Johnson now that Gary Kubiak is gone. And that scheme doesn't really feature the X receiver as much, which is not what Hopkins plays. So I like his matchup. He's going to be matched up for most of the day against Leotis McKelvin for the Bills, who's probably their better cornerback. But recently, McKelvin has been moving more around the formation, playing a little bit in the slot, playing a little bit against the X receiver. So I'm not actually. I take that back. I don't think he's going to be matched up entirely versus McKelvin, which is probably a good thing for Hopkins. So anyway, I'll be going Hopkins, and then this one's tough with Steve Smith or Brandon Marshall. I'm going to go Steve Smith because I trust him playing more, and I think that, as stupid as this might sound, there is something to be said about a wide receiver going up against his former team and really wanting to stick it to the Panthers. The Panthers' defense showed its cracks last week. Now, most of them are in the running game so far, it seems, but that obviously opens up opportunities for the passing game as well. And then as far as the flex goes, yeah, I'm going to throw in Brandon Marshall just for the big playability and the higher ceiling. If you want the lower floor and just a safe play, I'd go with Charles here. It's not necessarily the safest play, but if he's going to play, he's going to get some points. Matt, what about you in this one? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Bradshaw and Jamal Charles as the 2 running backs. It's tough to put Charles out there on not knowing what his status is and everything. Well, we know he's going to play, but we don't know how much work he's going to get and all that type of stuff. I tend to side with, hey, I don't want to miss out, especially when it's a great player like Jamal Charles. I know it's a little risky, but I say you play Charles and see what happens. You can't look back and regret things in fantasy football, and I think that if Charles goes out there and lays an egg, hey, I think your process was pretty good in deciding to play your stud there. But anyway, so I think you play Charles and Bradshaw. Yeah, he's a big part of the offense, which is nice. Not so much as a rusher, but as a receiver, he's playing well. They use him in the red zone, which is good. They seem to at least be as nonsensical as the Colts are with their offense and Pep Hamilton and all that. At least they know that Bradshaw's the better option in the red zone, throwing him those little swing passes better than slamming Trent Richardson into the offensive line 3 times and then having to kick a field goal. But anyways, and then I agree with you. I think you flex all 3 receivers, or you start all 3 receivers, one of them in the flex. With Steve Smith, I know you said, hey, it might be a little dumb to get into the revenge narratives. Not when it's a guy like Smith. I think he's ready to kill this team, and I think he'll have a good shot today, but we'll talk more about that matchup later. Okay, so moving on to our last question for the opening stages here, and this one comes from @DavyHayes on Twitter, and it's a PPR league. Do I start Allen Robinson or Terrence Williams? I'm going to kick this one off because I think the answer is easy. I go with Allen Robinson. I think he's the favored target of Blake Bortles right now. I know he caught 7 passes last week. I think he's the best receiver on the team right now. He's way better than Marquise Lee, who probably isn't even going to play. Cecil Shorts is a good player, but he gets most of his points in garbage time, which you can't always rely on. Some people do, some people don't. Robinson's a good player, and he looks more developed right now than I expected him to be. I think he and Bortles are going to build a connection that lasts for a long time, and I think it starts this week. The Chargers' pass defense doesn't. I mean, it's definitely improved, but it doesn't scare me from playing Robinson. And Terrence Williams, he's just way too volatile. I know he's scored a couple of touchdowns and all that, but he's really like the 4th option in that offense. And I mean, the Cowboys so far have it's been Murray and Dez, and that's it. Witten hasn't been very relevant at all. Williams isn't targeted much. He's more of a streaky boom or bust play, and I'd rather just go with the guy who I think is going to get more targets and be more featured in his offense, and that's Allen Robinson.
Yeah, Matt, so this one's a little tricky for me. So on one hand, I love what you said about Allen Robinson. I think that in practice, working with the twos, he probably developed a very nice rapport with Blake Bortles. But on the other hand, I'm actually going to opt to go with Terrence Williams. So first of all, just let me be clear, Terrence Williams was on my do not draft list in every league. He's probably the player I wanted to avoid the most of any. I really didn't think he was going to get much value. Players have gotten fluky, lucky touchdowns out of him. they have played him thus far this season, but those aren't really very repeatable. But the reason I'm going to roll with Williams over Robinson this week is mostly to do with game flow. I think that for the first time this season, the Cowboys are going to have to throw the ball from behind against the Saints team that's going to come in and play well on the road. I think just in this matchup and take advantage of that Cowboys defense. We'll get a little more into that later, but I think that Romo's going to throw for a lot of yards, and some of them are going to go to Williams, and there's a good chance that he scores a touchdown against these Saints cornerbacks that have just really struggled this year to go along with their two safeties. As far as Robinson goes, what edges it out to me also is that I think that everybody's jumping on this Blake Bortles bandwagon already because of what they've seen in the preseason and garbage time last week against the Colts when the Colts did not blitz. I didn't look into the exact stats, but I did watch this one on Game Rewind, and they did not. They sent 4 or 3 guys on almost every play towards the end of the game when Bortles was in. So I think that with rookie quarterbacks, what you see from defensive coordinators a lot is blitzing. I think the Chargers will be blitzing today. They're going to send a lot of guys, crowd the line of scrimmage, not give Bortles a lot of time to make decisions, take away his first read. And I'm not sure that he's going to succeed like everyone thinks he is. This is a guy who had some issues accuracy-wise and decision-making-wise when you put on the film of him at UCF. So I don't love the matchup for Robinson because I think he's going to be frustrated, as the whole offense will be frustrated. So I'm going to take the guy in a better situation here that I think is going to score more points. Vegas agrees that the Cowboys Saints have the highest over-under. So I'm just taking situation here, and I'm going with Williams.
Not a bad call there from you, Dan. Williams he's posted some good stat lines already. This could definitely be a blowout, so that makes sense. All right, we're out of questions for the first part, but
wait, man, we actually got one more. I just got from earlier.
Oh, all right, go ahead.
Okay, this one's from Brad Emanuel at BS Emanuel. So he's got Vereen or F-Jacks in the Vereen or F-Jacks. He's starting Gronk and EJ Manuel, so he wants you to know that, I think, because he's got both of those guys that can flick from a touchdown standpoint. And then in the flex, he wants Gates or James Jones, and he's starting Keenan Allen. And this is a half-point PPR league. I got to love these questions that give all the details. That helps us out a lot more knowing the settings and where you're putting these guys. So do you want to tackle this one first, Matt?
Sure, this is tough. I don't think there's any clear answers on this one either. You look at the games, and I think I'm going to go with Shane Vereen in the first slot, and I tend to think that when the offense is working, I know you mentioned this before. I don't think that this game is going to be as much of a Patriots have the lead situation as you mentioned before. I don't think the Patriots are all that great this year, and when they're at home against the Chiefs, or when they're away, the Chiefs are at home, I think the Chiefs will be competitive. So I think Vereen he'll still be used a lot. He's been a little disappointing so far. It's just been a little streaky. But I still think when the offense is working right, it's Gronk and Vereen. I think you can start those two together and feel pretty comfortable about it. And now the wide receivers, could you remind me again what that call was?
No, it's just a flex between Antonio Gates and James Jones.
Okay.
And he's got Keenan Allen going, so.
Right. Yeah, and in this situation, I'm gonna go with Jones. It's so tough to predict, and it's the London game, and gross. And he's got most of his points in garbage time, but those points still count. And in this situation, I like you mentioned, there is a lot of validity in the idea that you don't want too many players from the same team. And since I already did that in the first situation, I would probably go against starting 2 Chargers here, and I think I would go with the garbage time king right now, and that's James Jones for the Raiders. And the Dolphins, they don't exactly scare me from a pass defense standpoint either. It's tough. It's that's a tough call. Gates last week, he did burn us a little bit if you'd been relying on him as a tight end 1 after he caught 3 touchdowns and had a steady first few weeks. But at the same time, the Chargers, much like the Eagles, they distribute the offense pretty evenly, and they're perfectly content to feed guys like Eddie Royal if the matchup dictates it. So I'm not necessarily thinking that Gates is going to be super reliable going forward. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I'll first jump into that part of it just because you made the point that I was just about to transition into. I'm going to take a wild card here for your flex and say if there's space in your lineup, pick up Eddie Royal. So actually, it's an interesting call. You won't hear me tell you to play Royal a lot, but Royal just has an incredible matchup this week that can't go ignored. So he's facing obviously a defense that has struggled this year, just from a pass rush perspective. They're not really generating much from that perspective. The Jaguars, that is, they have Chris Clemens, Tyson Alualu, and Red Bryant, and Red Bryant's kind of like the 4-3 and Gus Bradley's that just is there to defend the run. He's basically a defensive tackle playing end, so he doesn't generate anything. Tyson Alualu is not very good. It was kind of a way overdrafted pick by the Jaguars when they took him in the top 10. Then you got Chris Clemens, who's kind of past his prime. So they've combined to grade out really poorly by Pro Football Focus. And then so Rivers going to have time. And then Royals matchup is going to be against Will Blackman, who, yes, is still in the NFL. Will Blackman, it's kind of unbelievable to me that he's playing a position like cornerback for this many years, but he's been terrible this year. Opposing quarterbacks have an 111.3 quarterback rating when targeting him. He's allowed 12 receptions on just 14 targets for $150. I think Royal's going to eat a lot this week. So if you can get Royal in that flex, and if you have somebody else you can cut, I would love to do that. Going back to the other matchup, I think Vereen is the play. Me and Matt see this game a little differently. I think the Patriots are going to play good on Monday night here, and I just don't like the Chiefs. But at the same time, I wrote a little bit about this in one of my articles this week. I love this matchup for Spiller more than I like it for FJax. I think this is a game where game flow will dictate that Spiller is going to be the lead back in this one because if you look at the past snap distributions in games where the Bills have had the early leads, which has been weeks 1 and 2, more so even week 1 against the Bears. Both weeks against the Dolphins, they had a nice early lead as well. Spiller gets 50% of the snaps and a few more touches per week than Jackson. Last week, when the Bills fell behind early, FJax played 75% of the snaps and Spiller only played 25% of the snaps. This week against the Texans, I do not expect the Bills to fall behind. They just match up better. They have a good, strong defensive line and offensive line, and that's kind of what can beat the Texans real quick. So, yeah, I like Spiller in this one, which means I don't like FJax as much. So, yeah, I'm going to roll with Vereen, and if you can sneak Royal in, Eddie Royal in your flex.
All right, so are we good on questions then for now?
I think that's the only one we got right now.
Okay. All right, so let's real quick run through the games we've decided to highlight. So we've got on first one of your picks, and that's the Saints and the Cowboys matchup. So you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, so I love this one. Obviously, as you know, this is one of Vegas's biggest over-unders this week, which in my opinion is always a smart way to roll with. Not to say Vegas knows everything, but they're pretty spot on, and they get better as the season goes on. So from both sides of the ball, I think we're going to see a lot of offense. The Saints' defense was a defense I thought was going to be really, really good this year, and so far they've been quite the opposite. It's not like they're not getting pressure. Cameron Jordan and Junior Gillette have combined to total 28 pressures this year, which is really good and kind of on par with what those two did last year in their breakout seasons. But it's really the coverage that has been a problem here for the Saints, and it's kind of surprising. Keenan Lewis has been one of the worst cornerbacks in the league after just being dominant last year, and I don't know if that has to do with his safety help over the top not being the same, and both Kenny Vaccaro and Jairus Byrd have not been what people have expected. Bird's getting a little better. He's now in the positive as far as Pro Football Focus's coverage grade goes. Vaccaro's still way negative. But it's not the same Jairus Byrd we've seen the past few years that it's just been a deep field, center field eliminator back there, taking away big plays. You're seeing the Saints coverage unit give up big plays, give up slants, give up comebacks, give up a lot of completions in the worst ways. So I think that Romo's going to have a lot of yards this game. I think Des Bryant is going to have a great game because he can really beat any of those Saints corners. Keenan Lewis, Patrick Robertson, and Corey White all have been major disappointments this year. When he does get Keenan Lewis, which I think will be most of the game, he's going to get a guy who's given up an 104.0 passer rating to opposing quarterbacks and 13 receptions, 149 yards, and a touchdown this year. That's Keenan Lewis. So I love this matchup for him. Even DeMarco Murray, I think, is going to have a decent game in the running game, just based on the fact that even though the Saints have been stronger in stopping the run, he's going to get a lot of opportunities with a decently open box as the Saints have to overcompensate for the passing game. And then if you look at the other side of the ball, this is a Cowboys defense that has played much better this year with Rod Marinelli coming in as defensive coordinator, but two other big contributors, Henry Melton and Darryl McClain on the defensive line, will both be out this week. Then you look at their cornerback situation where cornerback Morris Claiborne was demoted this week, went AWOL, left the team facility because he was so mad, even though he's been one of the worst cornerbacks in the league this year, burned on a consistent basis. Even Austin Davis burned him over the top last week. I don't really understand why he's mad about this, but the fact of the matter is he's still going to see a lot of run in 11 when Saints go to 11 personnel and the Cowboys have to go to nickel, and he'll probably kick Scandrick back to the inside, his best position, nickel cornerback in these situations. So you're going to see Morris Claiborne on the outside, and he's going to see a lot of Kenny Stills and Marcus Colston on the outside. And I really love Kenny Stills this week. I've been a huge Kenny Stills fan all off season, wrote a few pieces on him. He hasn't been what I've hoped because he's been injured and he hasn't gotten the targets recently, but I would say that this is the week where Kenny Stills can make a big play over the top because he's going to see Claiborne. And on the other side, Brandon Carr has also been really disappointing in coverage as well. So with the Cowboys missing some of their key defensive linemen, I think we're going to see more of a focus on these corners having to make plays in one-on-one situations, and I don't think they can make them. So I love this matchup I love Tony Romo. I love Dez Bryant. I don't mind Terrence Williams. I talked about that before just by default. Murray I'm good with starting. And on the Saints side of the ball, I love all their guys. Cooks is going to see a lot of those guys in coverage, too, on the outside. Someone wrote a great piece this week on the fact that Cooks is playing a lot more on the outside than we thought he might be. We thought he might be strictly a slot guy. He's not. I highlighted this in the offseason when I looked at his game film and broke it down and tried to translate his film from Oregon State and how it might translate to the pros. And he played a lot of outside receiver there as well for them. So I think you can roll with Cooks, you can roll with Colston, you can desperation play Stills. I'm not going to advise him yet in a 10 or 12 teamer, but if you're in a 14 or 16, I don't mind it. His matchup's great. And then yes, Breeze, Pierre Thomas, Kyrie Robinson, I love them all. So Matt, you want to tell me your take on this one?
Sure. I mean, I think this is the sort of game that you break ties in favor of getting guys in this game into your lineup because it's going to be a ton of points. That sort of thing, it's two defenses that have been. I mean, I think we expected the Cowboys to be bad, but we didn't quite expect the Saints to be this poor. But hey, here we are. Keenan Lewis, you mentioned that. Keenan Lewis, Jerry Spurd, Kenny Vaccaro, all those guys have been big disappointments for me. So I think it's a pretty good bet to get. I mean, Dez Bryant, I think you can expect him to play very well. Maybe Jason Witten even has a reliable week. I don't know. I'm really not playing him anymore. It's tough for me to advise anybody from the Cowboys, especially when they're at home. They're a disappointing team. I mean, it's odd they've dedicated all that money to put into that stadium, and they're still not a good team at home. It's just tough for me to recommend anybody from the Cowboys offense other than Dez Bryant and DeMarco Murray because they've just been the two guys that just are the force of that offense. On the Saints side, I think this is a great week to get any of your Saints in the lineup. Kenny Stills, you mentioned, it's a bit risky, but it's tough for me to advise playing him in, like you said, in a standard 12-team league or something like that. But if you're desperate, sure, this could be the week he gets over the top. If not, then I think it's time to start saying, hey, maybe this is not going to happen this year. But Cooks, he's been a reliable player so far. Colston, I'm ready to go back to this week against this defense. And Pierre Thomas, I expect him to catch a ton of passes. Kyrie Robinson could get some good runs. And Jimmy Graham, if you're in daily fantasy, I mean, I'm not telling you to start Jimmy Graham. Ooh, that's not a great take. But I mean, if you're in daily fantasy, I'm pretty content to pay the extra bucks to get him into my lineup as a tight end because. This defense has been, as bad as they are at most everything, they've been really, really terrible at giving up yards to the tight end. So I think, it's just a slam dunk to get him, even for his high price in daily leagues. But, okay, we'll move on from that game. Ravens. We mentioned the biggest narrative from this game is Steve Smith against his former team. It's something I wrote about at blackandbluereview.com. This week I wrote about, how is Steve Smith still staying relevant as a player when it looked like he was in a steep decline, honestly, last year in Carolina. He's really revived his career against the Ravens. I'll tweet that article out later. we can get into. So if you want to check that out at blackandbluereview.com. But I think he's going to have a good game this week. And honestly, I mean, beyond the, he's ready to tear up the Panthers, and he's definitely psyched for this game. I still think that Smith is a good matchup anyways because he's the team's top target. I mean, for all that we thought Torrey Smith was going to be this year, it doesn't look like that's reality. It looks like Smith is the guy. And he's played really well so far. And this is a team with a poor secondary. I think he's ready to go against it, and he's a high-volume player at this point, so I think he's a smart play, regardless of the revenge narratives. Otherwise, on offense, I know that the Panthers' defense showed some holes against their, theoretically showed some holes in their run defense against the Steelers. But rewatching that game, I mean, that was almost all Le'Veon Bell, who's just at this point an incredible player. I mean, you have to say he's one of the best running backs in the league right now. He made Panthers defenders miss in short areas like no, almost he can. I mean, those guys were in position to make tackles. Kuechly, Davis, those guys, they were there, but Bell was just making them miss. So I don't think that this is suddenly a run defense that we can count on exploiting. And for that measure, I don't think that Taliaferro or Justin Forsett are a dunk play this week. If you're desperate, you can play one of the two, and certainly some people are going to. But temper your expectations. Just because they gave up so many yards and big plays to the Steelers last week, I don't think that that's going to suddenly happen again against the Ravens. And on the Panthers side, I think that, I think Cam Newton could have a good game this week. I know that the Ravens pass defense has given up over 7 yards per pass play, 7 yards attempt on pass plays, and I think that that's a matchup you can exploit. I know Cam's price is falling on daily leagues. I know that people are starting to get a little weary of how banged up he is, but I think that this is a week that he could play well. He is starting to look more comfortable, and if he can get some time against this Ravens defense, I think that he can exploit their secondary that's been hurt at cornerback and a little disappointing too. So I think Cam is a decent start this week. And for the rest of the offensive guys, I think Benjamin at this point is a no-brainer. You start him every week because he can give you just dominant performances like he did in week 1 and last week as well. And outside of that, there's not much else on the Carolina offense. Like Greg Olsen is an every week start at tight end if you have him for the most part. But the running back situation is one you want to avoid. We don't know how healthy D'Angelo Williams is, although it looks like he's going to play. And then guys like Darren Reeves are there, but it's at this point the offensive line is not opening up holes. Maybe Williams can give this team a little bit of a spark, but it's a situation that you want to avoid. Dan, do you have any takes on this matchup?
Yeah, I think that while you mentioned Benjamin is definitely a must-play at this point, he will be shadowed, it's reported, by Jimmy Smith, and Jimmy Smith's emerging as one of the better corners in the league for the Ravens. I think he's going to give him some trouble. But the fact of the matter is Benjamin's so big that really it's tough to guard him with one-on-one, so this might actually work to his advantage. On the other and Benjamin's definitely my favorite play of the Panthers this week, and as well as Cam Newton for that matter, I think can also do well. On the other side of the ball, I actually disagree with you a little bit. Because the Ravens are home, I would actually like to roll with the leader of the Pierce Taliaferro committee this week. It's going to be tough to predict that, so I would say I'm less bullish on them if reports don't come out like Pierce will lead the crew or Taliaferro will lead the crew. If reports are staying as they are right now, it seems like it will be more of a timeshare, as Kubiak mentioned earlier, that all backs will get their play. I may shy away from that a little bit. I am a little bit more worried about this Panthers run defense than you are. I think that Greg Hardy was a huge factor in that run defense. He played really well. And without him, this defense to me is just not the same. You may disagree on that, but Charles Johnson is more of a pass-rushing type defensive end. I think you can really exploit him in the run game. He hasn't been very good as far as Pro Football Focus's run grades have gone, and it's just something I've also seen myself with just my own eyes watching them. But really the big way, I think, to attack the Panthers is, as you mentioned, through the passing game. So I think you did a great job there. They're just not really the same without Captain Munnerlyn and Mike Mitchell in the secondary. Thomas DeCoux was never really good with the Falcons, and he's been pretty poor with the Panthers so far. His real contributions have been I mean, his real negatives, though, have been in the run game. He's missed 4 tackles this year, which is a really high number through 3 games for a strong safety, for anyone playing safety, really, at either position. That's not good. And then his coverage has been a little better, but at the same time, he's just missing tackles. And that, if he misses one tackle in the secondary against Steve Smith on a comeback or a slant or anything like that, it could turn into a big play. And then on the other side of the ball, they've tried to move Anton Kaysen into coverage. He's one of their starting cornerbacks now, replacing Munnerlyn, and he hasn't been that great. So, yeah, I love Steve Smith in this matchup. As you mentioned, Matt, you said it perfectly. Torrey Smith is a guy I've jumped off the bandwagon on. I loved him in the preseason because I thought he would be the X receiver in Gary Kubiak's offense, which has generally gotten like 130 to 150 targets over the last few years with Andre Johnson. And clearly we're learning that he had a system devised for Andre Johnson. So maybe it had to do with Kevin Walter being his number 2 receiver for so long and Lester Jean filling that role in the later years. But now he's got Steve Smith playing across from Torrey, and he likes to feature him more. And I'm jumping off the Torrey Smith bandwagon. So, yeah, I think you hit this game spot on. I'm a little more into this Ravens running back duo than you are, but without really any knowledge of how it's going to roll, I'm not too bullish on it.
Yeah, there's really no clarity, and that's the trouble there for me. I think the Torrey Smith thing could happen eventually, but it's not happening right now, so we do have to move on from that.
Yeah.
Getting to the next game, and that's a fellow AFC North rival of the Ravens, and it's the Steelers versus the Buccaneers. Dan, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, this is another game I love for daily leagues. I am targeting Ben Roethlisberger. I am targeting Antonio Brown, and I'm even targeting Marcus Whedon in this one. So you're looking at a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. That's been the worst this year in pass coverage. They're really not picking up Lovie Smith's scheme. It takes a lot of discipline to run this scheme, and it takes a pass rush from the front 4 that they're not getting. Now, granted, a lot of this grade for them, Pro Football Focus, and these ratings that I'm referencing are Pro Football Focus's pass coverage ratings. A lot of that has to do with their blowout loss to the Falcons last week, and that just from the sense of they didn't have Gerald McCoy, they didn't have Michael Johnson, 2 of their better front 4 guys. But as far as the other defensive tackle position goes and left end in that defense, left defensive end, they don't really have talent there. And these 2 guys may be coming back this week, Gerald McCoy and Michael Johnson, but they're going to be playing through an injury. And if you look at this team, they're not generating a pass rush and they're not covering well. And even if you take out that last game with the Falcons, they still would have had the 2nd worst pass coverage rate this year as far as Pro Football Focus goes. So you're just looking at a team that is going to be trying to generate pressure against the Steelers' offensive line that has been much improved this year. Kelvin Beacham's playing very well. He's been neutralizing pass rushers. So is Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro. So those 3 are playing really well up front. They're not allowing much pressure to get by them, and that's going to let the Steelers target the Buccaneers cornerbacks in pass coverage. And what you're going to see is Antonio Brown a lot matched up against hopefully Jonathan Banks, who has been the worst cornerback according to Pro Football Focus this year. Jonathan Banks, and yes, his name is Jonathan, not Jonathan. I've really had trouble figuring this one out for a long time. I've cross-referenced this on about 8 Google searches, tried my best to make sure, is there supposed to be an A in between the N and the T? But no, there's no A. He was named Jonathan Banks. So I'm just going to call him Jonathan.
That should tell you all you need to know about him as well.
Yeah. Jonathan Banks is not doing well in Lovie Smith's zone-based scheme. Quarterbacks have had an 106.7 passer rating when targeting him. He's allowed 13 receptions for 144 yards through 3 games. He's not really good against the pass or against the run. He's missed 4 tackles already on the season. So the Steelers run an offense where Marcus Whedon plays the split end a little bit more than Antonio Brown, but not much more. He plays it on just over 50% of his snaps, and Antonio Brown will probably play around 35 to 40% of the snaps at the split end. And just for reference why that's important, Jonathan Banks does not move from the right cornerback spot where he matches up with split ends. Alteron Werner plays the left cornerback spot on the other side, and they do that almost exclusively. Jonathan Banks has been the right cornerback defending split ends for 96% of his snaps this year. So yeah, I think that really, even if Brown only gets roughly 35% of his snaps at split end, it's as much as he needs to make a few big plays against Banks and coverage. And that's why I really like Whedon this week as well, because Whedon is going to see about 50% of his snaps against Jonathan Banks. And so I love him as a wide receiver 3 flex play. I love both of them. I love Roethlisberger, Whedon, and Brown this week to make a few huge plays. On the other side of the ball, I just can't buy into this Bucs offense until I see improvement from their offensive line. The Steelers are reeling on defense, and they have more injuries in the secondary. They showed a little bit of pressure last week against a weaker Carolina offensive line. It's probably the weakest offensive line they've seen all season, and this is going to be an even weaker one with the Bucs. So I'm not rolling with my Bucs yet. This is another great matchup for Vince Jackson, but I thought last week was as well against the Falcons, but you really just saw McCown never have his feet set, never have time in the pocket, and it didn't allow Jackson to get open. So I'm really not bullish on my Bucs this week, and I love my Steelers. How do you see this one, Matt?
Yeah, I see it in a pretty similar way. I mean, you're right. I think all the Steelers are a good play. I mean, and even at running back, I don't think you mentioned this, but I think LeGarrette Blount could even be a decent play this week. You know, I think that we saw in blowouts that they're going to pull Bell for Blount, and I think that the Steelers will win this game handedly. And that Bucs run defense doesn't scare me at all. And we know that Blount, for all his flaws, can come out and give you a big play in garbage time, or even when the games count. And against a bad run defense like the Buccaneers, against a bad defense, honestly, in the Buccaneers, that I think that Blount could have a play that makes him relevant. And so as a cheap daily play, I like him as a desperation play. If you have some bye week running back, I think LeGarrette Blount can post a nice stat line for you this weekend. And as far as everything else you said with the Steelers, I think, this is a good game to get your Steelers in there. And for the Bucs, yeah, you're right. I can't really recommend to anybody on this offense at this point. Vincent Jackson would be the one guy, and if he was healthy, I would totally say he's a go, because Glennon, who is now starting for the Buccaneers, he loves to target Vincent Jackson. He did it a ton last year. But the problem is Jackson has like a fractured wrist or something. I don't even know how you play with a fractured wrist. So that's a tough situation that I'm looking to avoid right now. So I think you nailed this game. Moving on to the next one, and that's the Eagles and the 49ers. This is another game that Vegas projects to have a high point total, and I totally agree. I think the two defenses aren't very good, especially the pass defenses. So I think you break ties again in getting these guys into your lineup. On the 49ers side, I think Colin Kaepernick is a great play this week. I think he's going to see a lot of passing volume, and those are the weeks that he generally does better for fantasy than in the weeks where the 49ers can just pound the ball. So I think Kaepernick has a good game this week for sure. His wide receivers are kind of tough. I think Crabtree is a no-brainer play. Kaepernick loves to throw to Crabtree. That's something we know at this point. So I think he's a no-brainer play this week. At tight end, if Vernon Davis is healthy, I think he's a go, even though we know he can be streaky with his targets and everything. In a blowout game not a blowout game, but in a game with a ton of points, a shootout like this, I think he's a guy that you can get into your lineup or pay for in daily fantasy. It's tough at running back and at the second wide receiver spot. You know, I think that Bolden seems to be a little bit in the doghouse right now. I know that there was a point where he was reportedly getting into it with coaches on the sideline, and we saw Stevie Johnson get a lot of play last week. So that's a situation I'm probably, even though there could be a lot of points in this, I'm probably going to avoid that, despite the fact that it's a tempting matchup with Kerry Williams out there, who's one of the worst cornerbacks that sees regular playing time in the NFL. I'm sure the Pro Football Focus stats can back that right up. But yeah, he's not a good defender. He's not a good cornerback, and I think one of these guys could get over on him. It's just a question of which one is it going to be. And as far as the running back situation, that's tough. Right now, it kind of looks like a pretty even split between Carlos Hyde and Frank Gore. And the Eagles' front seven is a little bit better than their secondary is. So I don't know if I can really recommend Gore or Hyde this week. Hyde is relevant when he scores a touchdown, but he doesn't always see a ton of carries, so that's tough on that side. As far as the Eagles go, I think Foles is a good play this week. I mean, that's a pretty obvious statement. Despite his struggles, he still puts up great stat lines in this Chip Kelly offense, and he's going against a bad secondary. So I think that's really the way to go. You go with Foles. Just no matter how poorly he plays, he's still going to put up numbers. I think LeSean McCoy could bounce back this week. I know that he's definitely had some down weeks, especially last week when he averaged under 3 yards a carry. But I still think he can get one over on this, or he can get over on this 49ers defense, even though they're a little tougher against the run. I'm kind of edging away from playing Darren Sproles. I'm just not sure if he's going to be as great as he was the first 2 weeks. And as far as the Eagles' passing game goes, I know that Jordan Matthews had a nice week last week, and I like Matthews long term, but I'm not sure that he's going to see the targets every week to post big numbers as he did against Washington. But hey, we'll see. It's tough to guess with the Eagles' passing game outside of Maclin, who I think is a strong play against his 49ers secondary. And I definitely like Zach Ertz to rebound this week. Again, in a shootout situation, I think he'll be more the relevant player that he was in the previous weeks than he was last week. I think, like I said, I think this is a matchup that you can break ties in favor of getting these players in your lineup, but there's still some question marks for me, and that's the 49ers' second wide receiver and some of the Eagles' pass catchers. So, Dan, do you have any clarity to offer on those players in particular?
I would say that my strongest takes here on this game actually are with a few players that you mentioned. I really like Jordan Matthews actually to have a chance to repeat on last week. It's a very contrarian view. Most people think, okay, well, he had a few very people can always say touchdowns can be fluky. So he had a big week last week, driven by touchdowns. So this is the time you bench him. Those are hard to repeat. But at the same time, he'll be matched up with Jimmy Ward, who the Niners drafted likely to play safety, but he's been playing mostly nickel corner for them this year. He's lined up in the slot, defending wide receivers or tight ends who match up with him in the slot all season long, and he's already given up 8 catches. Three of those eight catches were touchdowns. He's not doing well in the red zone at the boxing out. Not being boxed out. So I think Matthews has the body type to really dominate him in the red zone. And with these looks, Matthews has a really good chance to beat him there. The question is, will they go to Matthews or will they go to Ertz in the slot down there? This is why I like both players. I just think they have a very high chance of scoring a touchdown this week. As far as the rest of the matchup goes, you're going to hear this constantly, so I want to just beat it in every time. I love the Eagles' offense, and I love whoever plays the Eagles' offense every game this year. This is not a new trend. Chip Kelly's offense is generating a ton of offensive plays at a fast pace, and that means a ton of offensive plays for the opposing offense as well. So you're just going to get a higher volume of plays each week, and that just leads to a higher volume of points. It's pretty simple. It's a game flow thing, and I want you to stick with these guys. So just one more matchup I'd like to touch on, and that's LeSean McCoy. I'm not as bullish on McCoy as you are. This 49ers defense has been better than I expected against the run without NaVorro Bowman, and that's just a testament to their scheme and to the depth they have up front on the front seven. And I think McCoy has a turf toe issue that hasn't been let on yet. It really originated after the third preseason game where he reported that he had turf toe and then said, okay, it's nothing big, I'm fine. The coaches downplayed it in a Chip Kelly-like fashion. He didn't really talk much about it. Now we're seeing a guy who doesn't really look as explosive as he had. He's not making those same cuts on the dime and really not really pushing off his foot as well as we usually see. And just most importantly there, that offensive line took another huge hit this week. They lost Jason Kelsey, their center, who's really just a dominant center, and replacing him is David Malk. He played at Michigan. He's been bouncing around the league. He was signed as a free agent this offseason after free agency went through its whole motion and no one showed any interest in him. So now you got him at center. You've got Hermans at right tackle. You've got 2 cast-offs at those positions. You've lost Evan Mathis at left guard. You still have Jason Peters left tackle, but he can't make an entire line. So I don't like McCoy. I think he's going to disappoint owners again this week, and it's going to be, at that time, people are going to start to hit the panic button. So those are my 3 main takes on that game. Matt?
Yeah, I think those are some good calls from you, and there's some validity to the McCoy thing as well. Okay, so last match we're going to get in before we bring TJ Hernandez on to answer daily questions and give some of his takes. And that's the Vikings and the Falcons. This is another one where I think, especially on the Vikings side, I think the Falcons defense, I know that they just blew out the Buccaneers and really, I mean, they destroyed them. That was a non-competitive game that was embarrassing to watch. But I still think the Falcons defense is one you can target at all levels, honestly. So if you have some Vikings players, perhaps you need to roll out Teddy Bridgewater if your quarterback is on a bye week. I think you can do that if you're aggressive. Jennings, I think, is a solid play. My guy Cordero Patterson, I think is going to have a big week this week. So if you want him I think if you can build a correct lineup around him, then Patterson could be a good play this week, because if he busts, so be it. But he can give you those type of plays where he really, really, really puts your lineup over the edge. And I think against a bad defense like Atlanta, I think that's going to happen. I think this is the week where they get him more involved, because, frankly, their usage of him has been pretty discerning so far. He hasn't been targeted like he should, and he has not been given rushing attempts like he should, which is confusing since their starting running back Adrian Peterson is not playing. And the running back situation, I think you could play Asiata if you want to, but it's so boring. I mean, his stat lines are always just they're like that. It's 12 for 36, just under 4 yards a carry, boring. Maybe he scores a touchdown or finds a lane as a receiver, but hey, if you need to, you can play him against this Atlanta defense. And as for the Falcons, I think you know your guys, and you play them. Julio, I think, could be the top wide receiver scoring this week. Same thing with Matt Ryan. This Vikings defense hasn't really shown me as much of what you'd expect with Mike Zimmer back there. I know they did have a good week. They did have a good game against the Saints last week and really did get after the quarterback a lot, and perhaps they do that against Ryan. But I'm still banking on my Falcons this week. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I think you're pretty much spot on with this matchup. I can actually preach I can actually do what I preach in this one, and I'm rolling with Teddy Bridgewater in one of my big 2 QB league. Rolling with him, had some injuries to Palmer. A few other guys are underperforming like Tannehill. And I'm rolling with Bridgewater in my QB2 spot. I really like this matchup. As you mentioned, Matt, I don't want people to take away too much from that Atlanta-Tampa Bay game, because before that the Falcons had 0 sacks through the first 2 games and generated very little pressure. I see something similar happening today against a much stronger Minnesota offensive line. And this is just the tail of the tape for me. I got to trust what I've seen from Bridgewater. He was my favorite quarterback prospect for a reason. He did the most at the line of scrimmage. He was very good at diagnosing the hot read and getting rid of the ball quick enough to that player. And that's a big key thing for me with rookie quarterbacks, because they're going to get thrown a lot at them. Defensive coordinators love to blitz them and crowd the line of scrimmage because that's a smart thing to do. Against somebody who hasn't played a lot and seen a lot, and that's a rookie quarterback. So I think he'll be good in those situations, and that really helps me out for really liking Jennings and Cordero Patterson this week. They have to get Patterson. They have to turn Patterson into the focal point of that offense. I think they know that. I don't think his route running is quite there yet, but there's different ways to get him involved as the focal point of the offense. I think that starts this week as well. Asiata I'm fine with, just because it's a bulk thing. He'll probably have some extra scoring opportunities against this Vikings defense as well. Against this Falcons defense as well. And then on the other side of the ball, with the Falcons offense against the Vikings defense, yeah, I'm really with you on what you said. But one key thing I want to point out is that I'm not starting Steven Jackson, and I'm very down on Steven Jackson for the rest of this year. In my ticking timeshare column, I look at this every week, and it's just week after week, his snaps just are so disappointing to look at. Just to get these numbers up for you with Steven Jackson, he's really only playing on obvious rundowns at this point. He played 4 pass down snaps last week, and he had, I think, 6 the week before. So on obvious, and this is not just obvious pass downs. These are any time the Falcons called a pass play, he was only on the field for 4 of those plays, Steven Jackson. So he's really a touchdown-dependent fantasy player at this point. When he doesn't score, he's going to get your team 5 points in a PPR league, and that's just no good, and that's not somebody you want to rely on week after week. So bench Steven Jackson, please. Don't have him this week when he doesn't necessarily score a touchdown and then has those 5 points and screws you up just because he scored in recent weeks. So yeah, those are my takes on that game, Matt.
Yeah, I agree. The Falcons are kind of using an odd committee approach to their backfield. I'm not really interested in any of their running backs at this point until we have a clear top player there, and I don't think we do at this point. But what we do have right now is we do have TJ Hernandez on, and he is a daily fantasy football guru, a guy who knows what he's talking about when it comes to this. And there are a lot of troubled daily fantasy players out there, myself included. So, TJ, the floor is yours right now to guide us through the darkness that is daily fantasy football.
Good morning, gentlemen. How's your morning going so far?
Pretty good.
Very good.
Good. Thanks for having me. I missed my hot cakes last week.
Yeah, we missed you, man. We missed you. We had no daily talk. We needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably why I did so bad last week.
Yeah. Luckily, I actually had to have a decent week last week. But yeah, before we jump into the matchups, I just want to touch on something that I've kind of been working on. I just posted a card on it at Sportable this week. One of the ways we can kind of look for market inefficiencies in daily fantasy sports, besides the like the dollar per point metric and whatnot that we're used to looking at. One thing we can do is we can look at salaries across websites and look at the percent of total salary that each player's price makes up. If there's a discrepancy in percent of salary for a certain player between two sites, for example, looking between DraftKings and FanDuel, then there's probably something that's a little amiss somewhere. One of the sites probably has an error in pricing on that player, maybe both the sites. So I posted that card on Sportable, kind of highlighting some of the players. But then I took it a little step deeper. I was kind of playing with it some more, and I did a roster adjusted salary discrepancy. So basically, if you're looking at DraftKings and FanDuel, they have a different amount of position players, and they also have a different overall salary cap, obviously. So they both have 8 roster spots, but FanDuel has a defense and a kicker. DraftKings just has the defense, and then they have the different salaries. So if you take an average for your defensive salary, and then average of just an average kicker and defense salary on FanDuel, you have a position adjusted salary of about $50,600 on FanDuel and about $47,000 on DraftKings. So then we can kind of get a more accurate idea of how much each player's percentage of their salary is. So if you look at that, we just kind of highlight some players that kind of stand out this week. If you want to get some shares of Eddie Lacy, maybe he's a little contrarian play. People are probably off him. He's $5,600 on DraftKings, which makes up 12% of the roster adjusted salary, and he's $8,000 on FanDuel, which makes up 15.8% of the roster adjusted salary. So you're looking at almost a 4% difference in percent of salary when adjusted for the different rosters and different salary caps. So if you want to get some Eddie Lacy exposure and you're playing across sites and you're paying attention to your exposure percentages, then I would suggest that you do get Eddie Lacy on DraftKings because he's much cheaper. Another player that kind of stands out if we look at that roster adjusted percentage of salary is Eric Ebron. He's minimum salary on DraftKings, which only makes up 6.4% of a roster adjusted salary, and he's $5,100 on FanDuel, which makes up 10% of the roster adjusted salary. So if you want some exposure to Ebron with Foria out, then you probably want to play him on DraftKings and not FanDuel. And I'll probably be highlighting that weekly on Sportable, but I just want to introduce that to you guys. And it's a cool way that you could kind of look for some market inefficiencies by looking at 2 different websites rather than just kind of looking at projections and salaries compared to each other, which we usually do because, as we know, projections can be kind of fluky. So if you see that discrepancy between 2 sites, then there's probably something that you can exploit there.
Yeah, TJ, I think that's a really actionable idea there. I love that because what I've noticed just from this year is that DraftKings and FanDuel do different. They're very different with their salary structure and how they really go about it. I feel like DraftKings overreacts to the week before a lot more than FanDuel does, which is just weird.
Yeah, especially this year. It seemed like the first couple of weeks, sorry to cut you off, but I noticed that a lot too.
Yeah, so it's like you'll see DraftKings, somebody will have a big week or a really bad week, and the salary will just really fluctuate based on the week. But as we know in fantasy football, every week is really individual, is different of itself because there's just matchups that go, so many matchups that go into every single game. So it's like, it's kind of stupid to do that, and I think that's why DraftKings is actually the one I've been playing more and investing more of my money in because I think that it's easier to exploit, and that's a great call you made.
Yeah, and you'll hear a lot of people talk in daily fantasy, and you'll hear them say he's cheaper on this site or he's cheaper on that site, and it just kind of got me thinking. We kind of have to figure out a way to account for the differences because obviously we can't compare the salaries apples to apples. So if we take that roster adjusted approach, which again I'll introduce more formally on Sportable this week, then it gives you a really pretty accurate assessment of how their salaries kind of match up. Obviously, there's going to be slight differences with scoring, but half PPR and full PPR usually don't make too much of a big difference, except for some particular players, maybe like a Sproles or a Vereen. But we'll kind of now that we introduced that, we can jump into some of the players on DraftKings that we like. You guys did a good job of highlighting a bunch of players I liked, going through all the matchups, and I'll kind of spare everyone all of the obvious values that you'll kind of find everywhere that are pretty popular this week. But one that's kind of standing out to me this week, if you're looking for GPP plays, you guys highlighted Eddie Royal, and in that same matchup, for my if you're kind of like looking to punt wide receiver, I really like Malcolm Floyd this week. He has an A dot average depth of target of over 22 yards, which is just absurdly large depth of target. If last week I think he had 98 yards on only 2 catches, and that matchup is really juicy. And obviously we're considering price. You guys were just talking about overall Eddie Royal is definitely a good little flex play, but if you're looking at price, Malcolm Floyd's only 3,600. So again, if you want that cheap um, if you want that cheap wide receiver, then then he's probably a pretty good play. Staying in that same game, if you're kind of looking to go pretty cheap at wide receiver, Allen Robinson, who you guys also kind of touched on, is only $4,400. Um, the Jaguars are probably gonna be throwing a lot in that game. Um, it's We'll see how Blake Bortles looks. It's obviously his first start, and they're big underdogs on the road. But I think you can get a little contrarian play by playing Allen Robinson. He had 10 targets last week for 7 catches, and I think they'll be throwing a lot. So he's probably a pretty good guy to target if you're looking for a little cheaper wide receiver to um, to fill out your GPP plays. Kyrie Robinson is a guy that everyone was kind of on in GPPs last week. He didn't. He had quite a few touches, but he didn't do much with them last week, which I think kind of makes me want to be on him even more this week in GPPs. I feel like people will be fading him. One thing you really want to target in your lineups when you're looking for some contrarian plays are players that burned the masses last week, and he was a really popular GPP play. So at $4,800, I'd say go right back to him. That's one of the highest scoring matchups of the week according to the Vegas lines, and I think that the Saints have a chance to be up big, and they can kind of give Kyrie some touches. He definitely has some touchdown upside with that offense. I'm kind of targeting that whole game across the board. I like Dez. I think a Dez Tony Romo stack can give you a nice contrarian stack where everyone might be on Breeze and Graham, Breeze and Cooks even. So I really like that game. If you really want to go off the board in that game, and you can target the Saints defense. Um, Romo's been turning it over early in games, and Dallas as a whole, when adjusted for strength of schedule, is 29th worst in the league fantasy points allowed. Did we lose Matt there?
No, he's still there.
Okay. So Dallas is adjusted for strength of schedule according to 4for4.com. Dallas is 29th worst in the league, allowing defense special teams points. So New Orleans at $2,700 on DraftKings is a nice little contrarian defensive play if you want to save some money and also have some of that interception touchdown upside.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. I think, like as I mentioned before, just I don't want to contradict myself. I do think Romo will throw for a lot of yards in that game. But as TJ mentioned, I mean, for defenses, you're really looking just more so for big plays, and I think they'll make some big plays in that game. So I like that contrarian call.
Yeah, and one other guy that I really like this week, you guys touched on him quite a bit. He's been having some problems, I guess, with the coaching staff and whatnot. Is Anquan Bolden against Philadelphia? We saw what Kirk Cousins did to them last week. Both Garcon and Deshaun got in the mix against their secondary. And I've mentioned this stat before on the Hangout. If we look at Fantasy Outsiders yards allowed versus type of wide receiver, one thing I like to target for my GPPs is the teams that are worse, the worst teams against number 2 wide receivers. Through 3 games, the Eagles are allowing 91 yards per game to number 2 wide receivers. Now, just to put that in perspective a little bit, the league average is 44.7, and the second worst team is allowing 75 yards. So they're 15 yards worse than the second worst team, who's Buffalo, which is why I like DeAndre Hopkins as well. But I think a lot of people are going to be on Michael Crabtree this week because obviously that great matchup. A lot of people are going to be probably going with that Kaepernick Crabtree stack, and I think if you get Bolden in there, you can get similar upside to Crabtree at a discount, and also give yourself a lineup that isn't going to look like a lot of other people's because people are going to be targeting Crabtree. So I like Bolden. I know he's been having a little bit trouble with the staff, but that Eagles secondary is not good at all. They're really, really bad, probably the worst in the league right now, and I just don't imagine them relying on Stevie Johnson for heavy targets. I mean, he had a decent game last week, but Vernon Davis is coming off that ankle injury. I think he's playing, but we don't know how healthy he's going to be. So Bolden at 5,000 is a pretty attractive GPP play for me this week. And another one I like across the board, I know I'm touching on a lot of wide receivers here, but there's a lot of guys I really like, is Sammy Watkins. He's only $4,700. He's playing against Houston, who is, when adjusted for strength of schedule, fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, I believe they're 24th, 24th worst, which is 6th worst in the league, sorry. And he is getting, give me one sec here. I want to get these numbers correct for you. Almost 8 targets a game. He's accounting for over 26% of Buffalo's target market share. He's getting 27% of their red zone targets. It's only $4,700, and the Texans are number 1, just that stat I referenced, versus number 1 wide receivers if you look at Fantasy Outsiders. And he also has average depth of target of 13.12, which is relatively high. So he gives you the high targets for the cash games, but he also has a relatively high average depth of target, which is something we look for in GPPs. Kind of correlates to touchdown upside. So he's a guy that I like for both cash and GPPs this week. I think he has a really nice matchup.
Yeah, I like that call. I like all those calls really. Basically, there's just you're looking at good matchups and players who can have a higher floor, correct? So it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, higher ceiling. So the floor is not as important in those plays, right?
The higher floor for those cash games, like I was touching about, Sammy Watkins has the high targets for the
Right.
cash game. Yeah, for the GPPs, we're looking for that high ceiling. So you're gonna be putting in some guys. It's gonna be uncomfortable. Sunday morning is when I put in all my GPP plays. You're gonna be putting in some guys that you might not feel comfortable playing just because they're inherently gonna have a lower floor. So they can give you that bust, but they also can boom for you. So yeah, that high touchdown upside.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, TJ? Actually, as long as I have you on this, we had a little technical difficulties. Matt cut out. Matt's back. I don't know if you guys just saw that. Saw him get back in. He came in an explosive fashion, on my screen at least.
He's over here too.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, Mike. My computer just completely froze, so I just got on my phone right now. So.
It looked like an earthquake had gone down on your screen. It was like moving back. Anyway, TJ.
Well, I am alive.
Yeah. Well, I have you for fantasy.
Go ahead.
I promise for anyone watching this and who watches this weekly.